And so a warm welcome to our male survivor community. Thank you for attending our webinar of recovery in recognition of National Child Abuse Prevention Month and Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Male Survivor is honored to have to provide the opportunity for survivors to gather, share their concerns among one another and with tonight's panelists. Our panelists this evening are Howard Fradkin, Murray Schane, Nathan LaChine, Kenneth Stockton, and myself. I'm your host, Tim Kearns. I'd like to let them take a moment to introduce themselves in a moment, but first, just to go through our agenda tonight. The focus here tonight is talking to your children about personal safety. We welcome your questions tonight and hope to address as much as possible within an hour. We've already reviewed the interactive features, but once again, quickly, the control panel is at the bottom of the screen. Use the Q&A icon to submit your anonymous question to the board. To the panel. The polls are initiated by me. I will bring those up as we get to the different items in our agenda. There's a raise a hand feature for instant polling, of which I see two are still raised. And so that's another way that we can interact. The chat feature is enabled for the attendees. And so the chats are going to the panelists. Right, you may start sending questions through the Q&A now. So let's let our panel introduce themselves. Howard.
Good evening, everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you. I am one of the co-founders of MaleSurvivor. I'm currently the facilitator emeritus of Men Healing Weekends of Recovery. I do a lot of work in the court system currently, helping advocate for male survivors who unfortunately got in a lot of trouble because they never got the help they needed. So I'm honored to be here. I'm the past chairperson and co-chairperson of the Weekends of Recovery program, past president and treasurer of the Weekends of Recovery as well.
Thank you, Howard. Murray.
Hi, I'm the current president of the board of directors of MaleSurvivor. I was on the board for many years between around 2003 and 2009, various capacities as board member, vice president, treasurer, and president. But also was involved in helping plan and the conferences that we had biennially. And so I returned to the board 2 years ago. And I'm very happy to be here and be with you.
Thank you, Murray. Nathan.
Hey guys, it's great to be here with everybody. My name is Nathan LaChine. I've been on the discussion and chat board for 18, 19 years. I've had the privilege of meeting many of you at Weekends of Recoveries and other events. So very honored to serve the community. That means so much to me. I'm now on the board of directors and I still work as the webmaster and administrator for the discussion and chat forums.
Thank you, Nathan. And Ken.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ken Stockton, and I also serve on the board of directors for MaleSurvivor. And I myself am a male survivor, having been abused as a child by my Little League coach. And in my healing journey, I certainly have recognized how important it is to be connected to the community of other male survivors. And I think that's what's so great about MaleSurvivor.
Thank you, Ken. And my name is Tim Kearns. I'm the host for this evening. And I'm also a member of the board of directors and the board secretary. I am an educator and a business owner, and I am also a survivor. So our agenda tonight is to talk about Child Abuse Prevention Month, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, both coinciding in April. And we also want to, since we have Howard with us, to get his recollections on the beginnings of MaleSurvivor 25 years ago. And in conjunction with this month, we're also launching our new fund drive to fund some initiatives that we are going to take us into the next 25 years of MaleSurvivor. But first, Howard, I know that when we approached you and you had offered to do something for the male survivor community, I know that you said that it couldn't be done really without looking at the overall landscape that is upon us right now.
That's right. We have been in some really very difficult times, excuse me, the past couple months, as we've all struggled with limitations and losses and significant stress that we've had to endure as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As survivors, we all, in one way or another, have faced an invader to our bodies. Too many of us have endured family members, those in authority, society, and government, that silenced us and betrayed us when we needed their help the most. So much of what we're enduring may feel eerily familiar to you. One of the lessons that I've learned working these past many decades with so many of you courageous survivors and many passionate colleagues is that healing is best done in community, and that's what MaleSurvivor is. Just as the phrase rings out now in this pandemic, we're all in this together. In the midst of these troubled waters, we can build bridges to each other, even if we need to stand on either side of the bridge. Still, we can be connected. As many of you know who've attended a day or weekend of recovery, we oftentimes use music to help us be present, to be grounded, and connected with our own experience as well as the experiences of others. So in that spirit, I'd like to share the soulfully sung Bridge Over Troubled Waters by Simon and Garfunkel and sung by John Legend. As I play this piece, allow yourself to take some deep breaths, be present, and picture the people in your life who are part of your bridge. Now let's see if I can do this. Should take just a second here. All right, here we go.
When you're weary and feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, I will dry them all. I'm on your side. Oh, when times get rough and friends just can't be found like a free. Oh, but trouble water, I will lay me down like a breeze. Oh, but trouble water, I will lay me down. When you're down and out, when you're on the street, when evening falls so hard, I will comfort you. I'll take your part. Oh, when darkness comes and pain is all troubled water. I will lay me down like a bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down.
So allow yourself to just take a couple deep breaths. Appreciate all the people who are on our bridge here tonight. Tim, you are muted.
Thank you. I'm just wanting to know if the panelists saw the chat question that came in about healing versus healed.
I think one of the things we always have to focus on as survivors is not so much that end goal, it's the journey we're taking. One of the questions that came up in the discussion board years ago was, would you go back in time and change were you abused or not? And that brought out a lot of great questions, especially for me, of the people that have impacted my life, the person I am now, and really looking back now that I've been on the site and working on my own healing for 18 years, of the journey that I took, and that it's really more important for you to just live every day the best you can and continue moving forward. I don't ever think there is that end goal of, oh, you're healed. There's nothing you're ever going to be. You're not healed. You're a changed person, and realizing that I'm not going to allow what was done to me in my past affect my future.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's helpful to think about degrees of healing rather than healed, and that every day that we're able to have more control over our lives, be more empowered, every day we can thrive, even if we're thriving in just tiny little ways, especially in the kind of stress we're under right now. What's most important is that you refuse to shame yourself. We're not in a competition here. We're not in a race. We're just each trying to heal and be as whole as we can be in any given moment in time. And that's going to vary tremendously from minute to minute, moment to moment, week to week, year to year.
I can speak to that question a little bit. 40 years after my abuse, I had the opportunity to directly confront my abuser. And I found that to be very beneficial and really a part of my therapy. And I also have seen therapists. And when I got home from that, I called one of my best friends, and he said to me, well, now you can get on with your life. And I found that difficult and painful, because I realized that this is my life, and what happened to me and the trauma that I endured is a part of my being that will always be part of my being. And I agree with Howard that that taking each day and moving forward but you can't really repress this or make it go away. It's really part of your being. And that's why I had so much difficulty with my friends saying, well, now you can get on with your life. Well, I can get on with my life, but this is a foundational part of who I am.
Howard or Murray, maybe you could speak to this. This question has come up a number of times, and that is, what makes this social distancing, isolation so challenging for survivors?
Well, certainly one aspect is that you have fear and anxiety about what's coming at you, when and if, and how you're going to respond. And you have really, if you get sick, you have no options. You know, you only have to. So fear and anxiety is part of the original trauma experience for most of us, I'm sure. And so having this virus in such a vicious pattern of contagion is frightening. And so it's going to trigger some of the same feelings that one had when one was abused, and therefore kind of piles on top of the usual stress of being somewhat isolated or all isolated, and of having no opportunity to engage in activities that involve other people. So I, for one, have always depended on being very physically active. And so I can't go to the gym, I can't go swimming. I can exercise at home, and I'm doing stuff online, but it's not the same. And so it's very hard to shift into feeling something that can substitute for that, if you were. So, you know, it's one of the healing aspects of my whole life. I became extremely physically active as soon as I think I can remember from after the abuse, but I was very young, but I drifted into being extremely physically active for years and years, and up to present until this thing came on. So it took away one of my little capacities or techniques for dealing with the trauma. And then therefore not having it made me much more aware of being more vulnerable. So these are the kinds of things I think that many of us are experiencing during this period.
Yeah, thank you, Murray.
Yeah, I think what I might add is that a lot of survivors are in therapy, and most of us who are in therapy have to use video chat like we're doing right now. And it's difficult. It's not the same as being in the room with your therapist, and it can feel very disconnecting. In addition, we're disconnected from many of the people. As you go through your healing, oftentimes you can get to a place where you can invite safe touch, you can invite a safe hug. And of course, all of those kinds of avenues are closed to us at this point. And that makes it much tougher, in my opinion, to have to deal with all this, you know, we want to learn. I mean, part of healing is learning how to trust other people. And here we are walking around keeping as much distance as we can, at least 6 feet from other people. And I know for me, when I walk around, I have this kind of paranoia that comes in, that I'm always afraid there's, you know, who's gonna infect me. And that's kind of counter to what we're trying to work on, which is to allow ourselves to get closer to people and to learn who we can trust.
Thank you, Howard. You know, I can speak about that. Last week, I went into the grocery store, and here in New Jersey, you're required to wear a mask, which I had on, and I had gloves on, which were thin, but they were tactile. I could still, you know, use my phone, or I could Uh, I could call my wife to see what size of baking flour she needed, that sort of thing. But after about 10 minutes, I noticed that I was getting very anxious about being restricted, I guess is the word I would like to use. And I felt like it was a very uncomfortable and horrible feeling that is just, it goes back to that same dark place. So I wanted to just remind our panelists that the Q&A questions that are coming in from our attendees, thank you very much to the attendees. I'm moving them to the answered category, not because they're answered, but because I want to make sure that you can all see them and respond to them as you're able to. Yeah. So, well, I want to move on to our main topic for this evening, which is talking to your children about personal safety, sexual abuse prevention, and it's in conjunction with National Child Abuse Prevention Month and National Assault Awareness Month, which are here upon us in April. They both coincide here in April. And so I just wanted to turn that topic over to Howard.
So we all have, many of us have children in our lives through the many roles that we may play. A number of us are parents. Some of us are relatives of children, or teachers, coaches, tutors, healthcare professionals, to name a few different kinds of ways in which we interact with children. And one of the first things that whenever parents ask me about what should they do, I tell them that it's really important to give the message to their children that they can always come to them to talk about any problem they have, no matter what it is, no matter any time they feel uncomfortable, anytime they feel scared, that it's always okay to come and talk to you, that you need to establish that you're safe. That means that you tell them that I'm never going to hurt you for coming to me. I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to make you feel bad about yourself because you're having a problem. I'm going to be there and help you. So that's number one, that's really critical. And that's true whatever role we play, that we keep telling children it's okay to ask for help. It's really important, I think, that you trust your gut. A lot of times our guts may feel uncomfortable about something that someone else is doing that we witness when they're around children. And if your gut says something's wrong, the highest likelihood is something's wrong. And then it's really important that you do something, you ask questions. Be aware that what may block you from talking to your children in your life about safety, it could be your own shame, your own denial, the fears that somehow you're going to scare them, the fears that you may ask questions you're not ready to answer. And no matter what those blocks are, again, it's really important that it's your job to create safety. I encourage you to be aware of any signs that the children in your life are struggling. Most of the times, in my experience, when children are abused, they give us signs. They scream for help oftentimes. Sometimes the screams are loud, sometimes they're soft, but usually those screams are in the context of changes in their behavior. So they may have more trouble at school, they may have trouble with attention, they may start being rebellious, or they may shut down and want to isolate. If they were really open kids, you might find them not trusting for some reasons. How many times somebody has said, oh, I don't want to go to that babysitter, and the parent goes, oh, they're fine, they're nice people. And so when your kid says, I'm having a problem, we have to listen. If they're saying something's wrong, something's wrong. be mindful that our children know when we're stressed and we're not functioning well. And of course, as male survivors, there's oftentimes times when we're not functioning at our best. You know, those are the days when we're doing good enough, but good enough may not be very good at all. It may be times when we're irritable and we're stressed out and we're angry and we take it out on our kids. And it's important that you know that if you do that, then it's important that you apologize and you let them know it's not their fault. Never.
Howard, can I interject for a moment
Sure.
and just wanted to see from raising of hands from our attendees that how many of our attendees have children? Could you raise your hand, use the hand feature, please? And then I have a poll, which I'm going to launch. But just gives us a basis about how many of our attendees have children.
I would point out that being a father of two boys, that, and I remember this from the Leaving Neverland film last year, that both of the young men who were abused said that when their child reached the age that the abuse began, I think, they had a sudden realization of how terrible it was. And I remember a similar experience when my boys reached the age that I had been, that it flares up as a reminder and it's on a dislocating factor. And it's important to recognize that, I guess, and of course not act on it toward your kids, but it's something that I think as a parent, even if you've never been abused, there are periods when there are things that your children experience that are a real challenge for you to deal with and to recognize and to be open with them and protective of them. And so that's just a personal reminiscence I had that was actually evoked by that film last year.
Yeah, I think one of the things about that film I wanted to mention is that grooming is something that many of us are quite familiar with. And you know, in the film, what happened was that Michael Jackson was, of course, grooming these children. And not only did he groom those kids, but he groomed their whole family. And he made everybody feel like he was somebody who could be trusted. And yet the parents would sometimes in the film say things about things they were uncomfortable with, but they never acted on it. They didn't listen to their guts. And so I think it's important that if somebody is an adult is treating your kid in a special way, or you see, may not be your kid, just a kid, and you see them being treated in a special way and it feels uncomfortable to you, again, that's a warning sign that we need to pay attention to.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, Howard. But you know, for speaking as a survivor, it was always hard for me to discern what was my stuff and my own internal fears and what was the reality of his or my child's situation.
Yeah, it's tough, but we can ask questions. You know, if you're uncomfortable, it may be your stuff, or maybe it is something you're seeing, and there's no harm in asking. There's no harm in just paying more attention. Because if it is something that's really going wrong, that somebody's grooming a child, then we can pay attention to that, because they count on nobody paying attention. They count on people just ignoring them and thinking, oh, they're really nice people. But of course they're not.
Right, well, this brings us to a good opportunity to do our first poll for this evening, which I'm going to launch. And I think everyone should be able to see this now. And the poll question is, rate your degree of comfort in speaking to your child or children about personal safety issues. Because it is a continuum, and this is what we discussed in our planning meeting. So the choices are for anybody. I see we have a couple phone-in callers. The choices are 1, low degree of comfort, 2, 3, mid degree, 4, 5, high degree of comfort. So a scale of 1 to 5, and then another choice that does not apply to me. We give a couple more seconds for people to poll. And then I'll reveal the results. And I got to be honest, I have to take a deep breath when you're talking about these issues. They're volatile. Okay, here's the results. Okay. And so for the results of rate your degree of comfort in speaking to your child about personal safety issues, the highest point percentage was 38% with high degree of comfort, followed by 27% does not apply to me, followed by a 4, a 3, a 0% for rating 2, and 5% for low degree of comfort. Any thoughts from the panelists on those results?
Well, it's certainly good to see the 38% with a high degree of comfort. And for those of you who are not there yet, that's okay. That's part of the healing process, is learning how to get more comfortable talking about safety and just understanding we have to be able to own that safety is important for us, and anybody who's a survivor has had their safety betrayed and violated. And so it's tough to be able to talk about it because it brings up all those feelings that many of us don't want to have to feel because it's so uncomfortable.
I have kind of a general question that Howard, you could probably respond to, or Murray. How important is it to create an environment of openness in your home, even at a young age, for kids, so they can bring issues forward to you?
Well, it sounds like it's a kind of rule of good parenting to have as much openness as you can. I think one of the things I think that someone talked about difficulty hugging their children, that I think that having had 2 boys, when they were little, I had no problem hugging them, even when they were the age I was when I was abused, which was 7. But as they got to be teenagers, it became, I think, mutually different. They were not into lots of hugging and certainly and hanging out with me in the same way. So also adolescents, kids tend to become a little more secretive and more unavailable. As much as you have kept things as open as you could, they develop a need to carve a little place of their own in the world and exclude you more than they ever did before. And so as a survivor, it's often hard to read. Is that a signal that something's going on? And again, I would commend Howard's view. If you think something's wrong, you say something. And sometimes you don't know, and it's important. You could just ask. You don't have to ask a specific question. You could just say, "Are you all right? I mean, is everything really okay?" Something. But I do think that it varies as the kids mature. That your degree of maintaining openness certainly will, I think, help even as they're adolescents, and certainly now that they're no longer adolescents, they're much more open than they were during that period. So it's a stress for a parent who's a survivor, I think, to react from one's own fear and not be able to quite trust one's kids, and that's a difficult transition one has to somehow manage. But I think we all face it, I think, to some degree or another as parents.
Thank you, Murray. So Howard, you were discussing that to looking for the signs, and then I interjected a poll, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to get back to your thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, I think I did talk about that. That what's important is that you just be aware of any change in behavior. That's the sign. When your child changes the way they normally are, they're telling you something's wrong. And so we have to pay attention to that and respond to it and check in with them and talk to them. Even if they're young age, you can still ask them, you know, tell me about what's going on with you right now. The more we can ask open-ended questions rather than are you okay? Because that's a yes or no answer. But more of a, how are you doing right now? Tell me what's helping you feel happy. What might be stressing you out? What might be upsetting you? What might be making you uncomfortable? Those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
You know, I saw an item in the chat arena, and somebody said, raised the issue of being concerned but avoiding being hypervigilant. I mean, that's kind of the other side. And I really struggled with that because I really wanted my kids to be exposed. I mean, I was abused by a coach, but I really felt that there were great benefits for my kids to be involved in sports. But I watched the coaches and the parents and the volunteers with an eagle eye. So I had to create a balance between my own vigilance and paranoia and still enabling them to be complete kids with opportunities. And it's a struggle to achieve that balance.
It is, and I think that if you're aware that you're becoming hyper anxious, that probably is a clue that maybe you're in that hypervigilant place, and yet it's normal as a survivor, right, to be hypervigilant. Right. And so I mean, it's just like when we talk about COVID-19, it's like it's normal that people are stressed and anxious right now. And to tell somebody, oh, everything's okay, it's like, no, everything's not okay. It's far, far, far from okay. And so we really have to give ourselves permission to feel what we're feeling and to see if we can find that balance.
Right. The stress of the coronavirus crisis is being played out in our country. One of the primitive defenses is denial. And we have, large groups of people in terrible states of denial that are really leading to really disturbing actions. These protests that are bizarre, but it's primitive denial. Herded together, which is even more dangerous.
Yep.
I think one of the things that survivors often become sensitive to is becoming re-victimized, not by sexual abuse, but by other means, either being conned or, and of course the worst thing is if your child is being groomed and you fall into being groomed with them, it can be a reenactment of the grooming experience you had. And so being re-victimized is a danger to all of us and something we have to be aware of, that it can happen when you're more vulnerable. And this is a time now when we're more vulnerable. And this is also a time when con artists are on the rampage because people are much more vulnerable as a whole. But I think survivors can be even more so. So we have to be a little more vigilant about ourselves and more self-aware.
There's an interesting question that was posed by Rachel. It says, could we touch upon how to teach kids the concept of consent? And I was surprised, pleased and surprised to see the words consent. And it's not a word I had thought of as part of the preparations for tonight's program.
It's a great question. There are some wonderful little cartoon videos. There's one called Tea and Consent, TEA and Consent, that I highly recommend to folks. And it has these little cartoon figures. I showed it in the military, and because of course the military, lots of people who abuse people don't understand what consent is. And so it says, if I invite you to my house and I say, would you like some tea? And you say no, well, that means you're not consenting. And if I invite you to my house and I say, would you like some tea? And you say, yes, that'd be great. And then I pour you the tea, but halfway through pouring the tea, you fall asleep or you change your mind. It's like, well, then you changed your mind. That's not consent. And if you agreed to having tea today, if you come to my house next week and I say, here, have some tea. And I expect that, well, because you wanted tea last week, you'll want tea this week. Well, you may not want tea this week. It's a really brilliant, sort of simple way of teaching consent that I like. So that's one of the ways. And yes, it's really important that we teach children and all of us to know that we have a right to set boundaries. We have a right to say what feels comfortable and what doesn't at any time.
Thank you, Howard.
Well, it's really critical with children because I think by the nature of children in relation to adults, they're not regarded as having the capacity or the right to consent or not consent, to refuse. And that is something we have to teach children and give to children that right.
So I want to give an opportunity for the panelists to pull together any other thoughts on the topic of speaking to your children, and also the attendees an opportunity to give us any other questions on this particular topic. We are at the 20 minutes remaining mark, and we want to get through some of the other sub topics of our program tonight. And as a reminder, at 8 o'clock when we wrap up, Nathan will be hosting an after hours chat over at the MaleSurvivor chat site. And Nathan, would you like to walk us through how that's going to happen?
Yep. So the chat room is already set up for everybody. If you have not registered for the MaleSurvivor discussion board, you will have to register. So registration is very simple. All you're going to do is, once you come to the site, click Forms and Chat, Discussion Board, and then you just click the Register button. Fill this out. Once you've registered, then you're going to come back and be able to see the discussion board and the chat, and then you will just log into chat. I'm also going to provide the direct link so you don't have to find the chat room to make it easier for you.
Great.
Thank you, Nathan. Can I see a raising of hands, the number of attendees that have used the forum or the chat function in the last 90 days? Okay, that's 1/7 of our attendees. Thank you very much. You can lower your hands, or I'll lower your hands. There we go. Okay. All right. So the other thing that we talked about in the planning for the program was that Howard was part of the beginning of MaleSurvivor, and we have gotten underway with a 25th anniversary celebration to commemorate the occasion. And so, Howard, I understand that you've got a couple of recollections that you would like to share from back in the beginning, and some milestones, things that were important to you.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, when this all got started, there were just a ragtag group of therapists who thought, we should be doing some training of therapists, because one of the questions I saw in the chat was about the dearth of therapists. Well, back in the late 80s, there were very, very few therapists. And so this group of therapists got together and they started offering conferences every 2 years. And actually the first conference was a conference that was partly about survivors and partly about perpetrators. And then it became just a conference about survivors, although usually the topic of perpetration was a part of it. I started attending at the second conference, and at the fourth conference, one of the things that happened in between was that a number of us who were survivors as well as psychotherapists started connecting with each other, and it was really important to us. I made so many good friends and wound up having this kind of ongoing support. And so we got to this fourth conference, and at the end of each conference, they'd ask for any feedback. And a number of us have been talking together, and what we said to them was, you know what, these conferences are nice, but they're every 2 years, and surely we can do something more than this. What if we had this organization that not only offered conferences, but maybe it would provide services for survivors, or we could help people get more training, and to promote an awareness that male survivors exist. I mean, by that time, we knew 1 in 6 survivors had some kind of history of sexual victimization. 1 out of 6 men had a history of sexual victimization by the time they were 18. So we knew that, but of course the world did not know that. And so we said, can't we create an organization? And thankfully, the people that were there, especially the people who've been organizing this, were very forward thinking. People like Jim Struve, who's the executive director of Men Healing. He and many others who were there said, yeah, let's do that. So a group of us from Columbus said, okay, we'll throw the organizing conference. And so the next year we pulled together 30 therapists, and we sat together, and at the time we were mostly therapists and body workers, art therapists, and we worked and created a mission and came up with a name, a National Organization on Male Sexual Victimization, NOMSV. It's the worst acronym in the world. But it got us started, and that was what was important, that it got us started at least, and gave us a mission, and we were able to hire a part-time person, Tricia Massa, who's still with the organization, and she's a godsend. And there were just many, many male survivors and allies who joined us, and we got moving, and we created the next international conference was held in Columbus the following year. And that year our committee decided, well, we wanted to do what we had talked, what these survivors had talked about, is let's have a conference where not only do we have professionals, but what if we had a conference where we invited survivors and they could come and talk with each other, and they could have workshops that they gave, and we could even have therapists and survivors in the same room while we had a topic going on. And that was totally kind of, forbidden, really. the rules of psychotherapists are we're not supposed to socialize with our clients. And we had to go through all this kind of stuff of how could we be in the same room together? And we figured it out, thankfully, and gratefully we figured it out in a way that still gave people the